gave the United States of America a monument entitled "The Liberty Enlightening the World." Many of you are familiar with this statue that was given. The French donated about $250,000, which was substantial at that time, for the statue itself, and then the United States provided about $280,000 for the pedestal on which it stands. And we all know this image well, the Statue of Liberty. The proud stance of a free woman with her right hand holding up a great torch and her left hand holding the tablets containing the date of the Declaration of Independence. And the Statue of Liberty is made up of 300 thin sheets of copper weighing about 100 tons. And roughly 19 years later, after the Statue of Liberty was erected, a poem by a lady by the name of Emma Lazarus was put on the pedestal in 1903. And it says this. It says, "Keep ancient lands, your storied pomp, cries she with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest tots to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." Of course, the Statue of Liberty has become synonymous with freedom. The Statue of Liberty has become synonymous with kind of American, excitement and liberty and patriotism and so on. Well, this morning in Daniel chapter 2, we will see a statue, but this is not a statue of liberty. This is a statue of bondage. You could say this is a statue that can only be broken by one person, a statue that can only be torn down by one person, and that's Jesus Christ. And Jesus didn't say, "Bring me your tired," but he did tell us in Matthew 11, verse 28, to come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. And so this morning, I've titled this morning's message in Daniel chapter 2, verse 24 through 49. I've titled it, "A Statue, a Sign, and a Stone." They did teach me that in seminary, right? All the S's. A statue, a sign, and a stone. And we'll be looking at 4 points if you're taking notes. Verse 24 through 30, we'll look at preparing the king. Preparing the king. Verse 31 through 35, describing the dream. Verse 36 through 43, elaborating the dream. And then verse 44 through 49, predicting the coming. So preparing the king, describing the dream, elaborating the dream, and predicting the coming. Now, if this is your first time or you haven't been with us in a little while, I like to set the scene so we're all moving in the right direction, all on the same page, all moving in one way, one area. We are currently in the Old Testament book of Daniel, in a series that we've titled Define the Status Quo, or really bucking the trend, being a non-conformist, not conforming to this world. Actually, it is a biblical calling. Romans 12:2 says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." And we see that really take place in the life of Daniel. Daniel was a young man. We'll see him even grow to the ripe old age of 90 and see how throughout his entire life he refused to conform. He refused to give in. He refused to give up and always trusted in the Lord, even when he faced hostile political structures, even when he faced conspiracy theories, even when he faced the lion's den. We'll see that no matter what, Daniel reminds us that God is in control, God is working, and God is moving. And that's actually one of the themes of the book. Number one, the sovereignty of God. We see that throughout the book of Daniel, it's God who moves. It's God who directs the course of nations and establishes government. We see throughout the book that God is always the one kind of orchestrating the orchestra behind the scenes. And even though Daniel is a POW, even though Daniel is 1,500 miles from his family, whom he'll never ever see again, even though Daniel is in this wicked empire, we see that God is working. And I think Daniel would step forward and say, much like Paul did when he was held captive, where Paul would say, I want you to know, brethren, that the things that have happened to me have actually been a furtherance of the gospel. Or as Joseph would tell us in the Old Testament, that what you meant for evil, God actually would use for good. And the second theme that we see throughout the book is that, number one, God is working behind the scenes. But number two, how do we live in Babylon? How do we live in a hostile world? How do we not just survive this world, but thrive in this world? How do we not conform to this world, but be changed by this world? And through this, we see Daniel will not conform to this world, but actually change the world around him. Now, some basic info on Daniel so that we all know where he's coming at. Daniel uses a narrative of what we would call apocalyptic terms. Now, that word apocalyptic or apocalypse, for many of us, conjures up the idea or the thought line of it's the end of the world. Everything is being destroyed. You've got Bruce Willis and Ben Affleck riding a comet, Armageddon, and just the end of the world, bad stuff. But the word apocalyptic or apocalypse, just simply, it really means to reveal. It really means to pull back the curtain. It's kind of like a Chip and Joanna Gaines when they get to the new house, and there's the new house, and they have the old house there, and then they pull it apart, and she's like shiplap, and they're excited about things. You guys know that, and they reveal the new house. Okay, you guys watch that show? Am I the only one? HGTV, it's where it's at. And so they're revealing the house, and that's the idea here. Over half of the prophecies in the book of Daniel have already been fulfilled. They have been revealed. They have been seen as we've gone through time. And for Daniel, they were future events, but for us, they're past events. And that's one of the things we'll be covering today. We will see in this section of Scripture today that God will work and move and give Daniel give him a dream and give him the interpretation of the dream of the king who couldn't sleep and the wise men who couldn't speak. And what we'll see is the prophet couldn't keep a secret, and God will do this amazing work. And for us, we get history on our side. For Daniel, it was future events, but for us, we get history. We get to see through the telescope of history of events that have already happened. And so, notice our first point as we jump into this section of Scripture. We'll see verse 24 through 30, the preparing of the king. Daniel will be preparing the king for who should get the credit or who should get the glory. Notice he starts in verse 24. Therefore Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. And he went and said thus to him, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me before the king, and I will tell the king the interpretation. Then Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king and said thus to him, I have found a man. I love that. It's kind of typical bureaucrat. Like, I found someone, O wise king, of the captives of Judah, who will make known to the king the interpretation. And the king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar. Remember, his name was Daniel, Jewish, Hebrew, and it was changed to the Babylonian language, Belteshazzar, or all hail Baal, right? The god of Baal. And what we see is, he says in verse 26, and the king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? And Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king had demanded, the wise men, the astrologers, magicians, and soothsayers cannot declare to the king, but there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days, what's going to take place in the future. Your dream and the visions of your head upon your bed were these. As for you, O king, thoughts came to your mind while on your bed about what would come to pass after this. And he who reveals secrets has made known to you what will be. But as for me, this secret has not been revealed to me because I have more wisdom than anyone living. But for our sakes, who makes known the interpretation to the king, that you may know the thoughts of your heart. Daniel starts by telling Arioch, the chief executioner, remember that was his job. He killed people for a living. He was the chief executioner of Babylon. He tells him to quit killing the wise men, and because he has the dream and the interpretation, and to take him before the king. And so he asks him to stop. Now, here's what's crazy is Daniel could have said, those guys are bad, those astrologers, those sorcerers, those evil guys, they're not good, I'm good, they're bad, you just go ahead and kill them all. But what we see is Daniel doesn't care about his personal gain. He just cares about the fact that God is the one getting uplifted. God is the one being glorified. And here's Arioch, who comes and he tries to take credit for finding Daniel. Wasn't it Daniel that came to Arioch? Daniel came to Arioch. But here he comes to the king and says, I found a guy. Daniel just wanted to make sure that God got the glory. Arioch was trying to exalt himself in the eyes of Nebuchadnezzar, the king. Daniel chose to ignore Arioch's attempt to get some recognition and instead directly addresses the king by giving God all the glory. And notice what he has kind of in the tone of his voice. He says that there is a God in heaven who reveals. He has made known the secret. He's the one who will tell you what to do. Daniel gives credit where credit is due. And now he's no longer just a name amongst the exiles, Belteshazzar. He's about to graduate, sigma cum laude or whatever, from the Royal Academy of Babylonian Arts and Sciences. He's about to give the dream and the interpretation. Remember last week, the king had this dream, and he goes to the astrologers and magicians and magi and all the smart guys in the kingdom and says, I want you to give me the dream and the interpretation. And if you can give me the dream, then I'll know the interpretation is legit. I know you guys are the real deal. And the astrologers and sorcerers and magi and Chaldeans come in. They're like, there is not a human on earth that can do that. King, you're being unreasonable here. At least tell us the dream and we can give you the interpretation. And he's like, no. I want you to tell me the dream and the interpretation. And then I'll know you're real. The secret that you wanted revealed by these wise men who couldn't do it, Daniel will say, you know what? There is a God in heaven that can. To King Nebuchadnezzar, God was revealing some secrets to him. And here's what I love about Daniel's approach. Notice what he says in verse 30. He says, this hasn't been revealed to me because I have more wisdom. This hasn't been revealed to me because I'm better or I'm greater or I'm the best. No. He chose to be humble in this. And that's always the case in the way that God works. God is willing to exalt the humble and bring down the proudful. God will use the humble and the weak. And notice he's preparing the king to see and know that God is working. That he might be king, but there's someone greater than him. And he uses the word, notice in verse 28, latter days. That word latter days always in the Old Testament has a reference in conjunction with the coming of Jesus Christ. And so he's saying, listen, king, this is the dream. God has revealed to you things that are going to happen in the future. For us, some of the events have already happened, and yet there's still one more event that gives us the interpretation of the dream that is yet to happen, that has not been fulfilled in Bible prophecy. But what got Nebuchadnezzar so riled up was he was focusing on, notice in verse 29, what was to come, the future. That's the reason why he couldn't sleep at night, because of the dream. He was thinking about what was going to take place after he died. And I'm sure for many of us, some of us have lost sleep. The moment we put our head down on our pillow, we start to lose sleep because we start to think about the future, don't we? We start thinking, man, how am I going to pay for college for my kids? Or what am I going to do when I retire? How am I going to handle retirement? Am I going to buy an RV and just tour around the U.S. and just live my life? Or what am I going to do? Like, we start thinking about the future, and we start thinking about what's going to take place and the events to come. That's what started this whole thing off. He was thinking about what was going to take place, and he's making sure, even in the midst of this, that God gets the glory. That God gets all the credit, God gets all the glory. And here's the question I would ask you. Does God get all the credit and all the glory in your life? Do you have a job And do you look at your job and say, well, I have my job because I'm smart, I got an education, I was able to do that? Or do you look at your job and you say, you know what, God, it's because of you. God, it's because of your grace that I have this job. God, it's because you gave me the ability to build things with my hands or to write code with my fingers. It's because of you, God, that I've got this ability. Or do you have a house? And do you look at your house and do you say, God, you know what? Thank you for my home. It's because you've blessed me with it. Or do you think, oh, it's because I got a good deal. I finagled a good deal. I worked it out. I saved. When we remember that we don't deserve anything in this life, when we remember that every good and perfect gift comes from above, that's when God can work. That's when God can do great things. Do you give God credit? Do you give God glory for the things in your life? Even the little things, you get a vacation, you get a new car, you get a good meal, just to thank God, to know that he's the one that gets the credit. This is why Jesus said when we pray, he says, give us this day our daily bread. God, thank you for my daily bread, not just for my, bi-weekly paycheck. Give us this day my bi-weekly paycheck. No, give us this day our daily bread. God, you provide for me what I need for today. And what I love is that there's no hesitation in Daniel's voice here. Because he's been spending time with God. He has the authority to say, you know what? It is God who reveals dreams. There's a God in heaven that's going to reveal this to you. He doesn't come to King Nebuchadnezzar and say, oh, wise, great, humble king, I think your dream might be something about like a statue, and maybe if there was like some metals in there, and can you please just not kill me? No. There was authority in his voice. Because this is the word of God speaking. He got a direct revelation from God. He heard from God. And you can see the contrast between him and Arioch. I found a man. And Daniel's like, no, God's the man. He's looking at it. It's like, have you guys ever seen the Pigeon Bible or read the Pigeon Bible? It's the Hawaiian Bible. You got to look it up. It's the best, okay? The Hawaiian Bible. And it's like, it says things like, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son. And when you read it, it's like the big man upstairs, so like these people that, it's just like, it's cool, It's like, it's a cool version. It's awesome. But like, that's Daniel's like, nah, God's the man. God's the one. It's not because I'm better. It's not because I'm smarter. It's not because I'm wiser. It's because God is the one doing it. It's all about God. But here's Arioch thinking it's all about me. Daniel was humble. Arioch wasn't. There's an old saying that says, empty trucks make the loudest noise. And Arioch is an empty truck, making a lot of noise. But here's Daniel. You know what? It's God who gets the credit. It's God who gets the glory. It's not me. He's preparing the king for the king to know that it's not because Daniel is great. It's because the God that Daniel serves is great. Notice our next point. He begins to describe the dream. Verse 31. He says, you, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. This image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partially of iron and partially of clay. And you watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer's threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This is the dream. Notice he starts by giving the dream to the king. The king refused to tell anyone about the dream because he wanted to see who was legit. And notice Daniel comes and he says, "O king, you were watching. You were out in the field watching, and there was this great image," or the word here literally is colossal, this a massive statue. And notice he comes in and he says, and you were watching, and how amazing it was. He goes on and he says it was excellent, and he stood before you, and it was awesome. So he's a Southern California prophet, you know. It was awesome. Right? This is everything is awesome. Right? It was just. You guys see the Lego movie? Yeah? Okay. It was awesome. It was powerful. It was grandiose. Radiance and brilliance. And I'm sure for King Nebuchadnezzar, it was terrifying. Don't you find it interesting that what he saw was a statue? And I find it interesting because this is noteworthy. Babylon was the capital of idolatry in that day. Remember, Babylon, the city itself, was 4 times the size of London today. They had walls roughly 30 stories tall, wide enough to have 6 chariots side by side so that they could have races on it. I mean, it was a grandiose city with statues everywhere. And here God speaks to really an idolater in a language that an idolater can understand. He gives him this amazing image, this statue, head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze or brass, and legs of iron, feet of iron and clay. It's an image of a man because we're dealing with man's rules. This is man's kingdom. You could say this is the time of the Gentiles, as Jesus would call it. But here's what I want you to notice about this statue is, number one, that it's top heavy. It's top heavy. As it goes from gold down to iron and clay, it's top heavy. The specific gravity of gold is 19. The specific gravity of silver is 11. The specific gravity of bronze is 8.5. Of iron, 7.8. And the specific gravity of clay is roughly 2. Meaning this image is unstable. This image is speaking of man's systems and man's kingdoms, man's empires, man's rulers. And I want you to notice that it's top heavy. It's unstable. But at the same time, here's what I want you to notice in it, is that as it goes from top to bottom, it's top heavy, but it also goes from top to bottom, it grows in its strength. Gold is really soft. Silver gets stronger. Brass or bronze gets stronger. Iron stronger, except for the feet of clay. This dream that Nebuchadnezzar has, this image of this statue, of man's kingdom, man's systems, man's way of doing things, man's ideas, man's philosophies, man's leadership. And all of a sudden, here's what's so cool. It tells us that there's a stone that comes at it that wasn't carved with human hands. And notice it crushed the statue. It crushed the man's way of doing things. And it became a great mountain. The Babylonians worshipped a god by the name of Marduk. Marduk was known as the Great Mountain. And here I find it interesting that God uses a stone not made and carved with hands to crush man's way of doing things, to become the great mountain. In other words, God was revealing to Nebuchadnezzar that there was someone bigger and powerful and better and badder than him. Not badder in the sense of bad, but, awesome, cool, wicked, great, not wicked, but you know what I mean? Gnarly, I don't know. And so, God was working and doing this amazing thing where, like David and Goliath, where David would use a stone to slay this monstrosity of a man, God was using a stone and will use a stone to slay man's way of doing things. And I'm sure King Nebuchadnezzar was like, that's totally the dream. Like, I'm sure his mind was blown. God was speaking to Daniel and giving him a glimpse into the future. God was giving him a glimpse of things to come, revealing and pulling back the curtain. And we'll find out what it means here soon, but here's what I would ask is, why is prophecy important to us today? Why is prophecy important to us as believers today? Well, I'll give you a few reasons why. Number one, I believe prophecy is important to us as believers today because it shows the legitimacy of God. It shows that God is the one who knows and foreknows things and is able to predict things before they even happen. It shows that God is there, that he is real. When he reveals it in his word, it shows that he wants us to know what's going on. He wants us to know what's to come. You know, for us as believers, sometimes there are things in this life that we're not going to always know and understand. I'm not going to always know and understand why evil happens in this world. Why the guy who drinks and drives survives the car wreck, and yet the family on the other side dies. Why we get cancer. Why there are things that we might not know this side of heaven. But I will say, in regards to God's word, God desires to let us know what's going on. Number two, it shows that history has a beginning and an end, that there is going to come a point where we are moving towards the final goal of being with Jesus. That there is a beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and there is an end to this earth's history. And number three, it should lead us to righteousness. That prophecy is important because it leads us to righteousness. Because if the things that the Bible talks about that have been fulfilled and yet are yet to be fulfilled, it should put the fear of God in us to look forward to the things to come. It gives us what we would call maybe a future and a hope. That when we turn our hearts to God, he will deliver us. That there is something to look forward to. Because if God didn't reveal to us, listen, there is coming a day when he is going to set up his mountain. He's going to set up his kingdom. He's going to set up his way of doing things. And all of the things of this world are going to be passed away. If God didn't reveal those things to us, then what's the point of living for the future? Eat, drink, be merry, live your life now, do whatever you want. But for us, it should change our hearts to think, man, there's going to come a day where I'm going to receive a crown. And then I'm just going to give that crown right back to him. There's coming a day where I'm not going to have to deal with divorce. There's coming a day where I'm not going to have to deal with cancer. There's coming a day where my body will be made whole. There's coming a day where I'm going to be worshiping Jesus every single moment of every single day. There's not going to be strife and bitterness and anger and gossip and country music ever again. I'm going to live my life in the presence and the glory of Jesus. And so as we look at that, it gives us a future and a hope. And so prophecy gives us a look into the future, tells us of the things to come so that our hearts are ready and prepared for those events. And so notice now Daniel will give the interpretation of the dream. Remember, for Daniel, this was future events to come. For us, we get the telescope of history where we get to see how those events have actually been played out. Notice what he tells us in verse 36. This is the dream. Now we will give, or we will tell, the interpretation of it before the king. Who's we? Me and God. All right? Me and God. He says, you, O king, are king of kings. Lowercase king of kings. Notice, lowercase king of kings. For the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the fields and the birds of heaven, he has given them into your hands and has made you ruler over all of them. You are this head of gold. But after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours. Then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. And like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. Whereas you saw the feet and toes, notice, underline toes, partially of potter's clay and partially of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, yet the strength of the iron shall be in it. Just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay, and as the toes of the feet were partially of iron and partially of clay, so the kingdom shall be partially strong and partially fragile. As you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in these days, in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up his kingdom. So here's what I want you to kind of see through this, because we're going to work through this pretty quickly. This is what Daniel sees. And as we look throughout history, we get to see the fulfillment of that. And we're going to revisit this in Daniel chapter 7, so we're not going to go into every single detail, but we'll get a snapshot here, and then in Daniel chapter 7, we'll dive right on in. But like I said, remember, we have history on our side. For Daniel, he was making a prophetic statement that God was speaking of things to come. And so notice we begin with the head of gold. The head of gold, Daniel says, that's you, King Nebuchadnezzar. You are the head of gold. You are the big kahuna, the head honcho, the, chief enchilada. I don't know, like you are the one in charge. You're the guy. You're governing the world's empire right now. And for Babylon and for King Nebuchadnezzar, you could say they were definitely a city made of gold. It was a nation and a city that was called the City of Gold. Around 70 years later, the historian Herodotus visited Babylon and said that the city had more gold than any other city I've ever visited in my life. Gold leaf on the palaces and on the public building. It oozed, he said, out of the pores of Babylon. It was a golden city. And yet Babylon, the old nation empire of Babylon, where we see modern day Iraq and the city itself, modern day Iraq, only lasted about 60 years. It didn't last that long, and it would be King Nebuchadnezzar, his father Nabopolassar, King Nebuchadnezzar, and then his grandson would ultimately take over the kingdom, and his life would be required of him. What we see here is Daniel tells the king, "King, you're great, you're on top, but guess what? There's going to be another kingdom that comes after you. There's going to be a second kingdom made of silver." And we're not told who that is here. We will be told who it is in subsequent chapters, but we believe it to be ultimately who would take over the Babylonian Empire, which would be the Medo-Persian Empire. The Medo-Persian Empire was two empires brought together as one under Darius the Mede and Cyrus. And the Medo-Persian Empire, they kind of ruled together in dual capacity. And notice what Daniel tells us. Daniel tells us that there's a kingdom coming after yours, the head that's going to be made of silver, arms and chest of silver. So two empires, left hand, right hand, two empires coming together and forming one. And what's interesting is Darius the Mede will establish a new government called the tribute. Some of you might be familiar with the tribute form of government, where every one of his captives will be demanded to pay them silver. Silver was the metal of that empire. It was a much larger empire geographically, but it was definitely weaker than the golden empire, Babylon, because it lacked a central government. The third empire, we're told here, is an empire made of bronze, a kingdom of bronze. There's going to come a kingdom that will take over the Medo-Persian Empire, made of bronze. And there was a guy who decided to give himself the last name Great. And his first name was Alexander the Great. The Greeks and Alexander the Great subsequently were known as the Bronze Empire. They ruled over all of the earth. They took over the Medo-Persian Empire, and historians called them the brazen-coated Greeks because their soldiers wore bronze metal chest and breastplates. Their shields and helmets were made of bronze. Now, here's what's so amazing is that when Alexander the Great was conquering the known world at that time and ending up taking over the Medo-Persian Empire, he had made his way and destroyed pretty much every city on his way, destroyed the city of Jericho, obliterated it, made his way to the city of Jerusalem, was ready to sack the city of Jerusalem, and Josephus, the Jewish historian, tells us that the high priest Jedidah came out and showed Alexander the Great the scroll of Daniel that had predicted that Alexander, a bronze empire, was going to come and take over the known world, that God had predicted it, God had prophesied about it. And according to the historian, it says that Alexander the Great dismounted from his horse and paid homage to the God of the Jews for knowing how great he was, that he was going to be coming on the scene, and he spared the city of Jerusalem. But the story continues. Notice the bulk of the focus is on the fourth kingdom in verse 40. It says, it shall be as strong as iron. Again, we're not told who this is, but if we look at history, the kingdom that came after the Bronze Empire, the Greeks, we see is the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire was known as the Iron Empire. The iron legions of Rome would be like a steamroller going through their kingdom. Leopold states that the Roman legions were known for their ability to crush all resistance with an iron heel. Now, if you were to look at the image of Nebuchadnezzar and the one that he saw in his dream, you would notice that the legs form the strongest part of the statue, but they are also the longest in its length. And that would be the case. The Roman Empire would last roughly about 1,000 years. But what I find interesting, though, is the Roman Empire would last a long time. But if you notice the left leg and the right leg, the empire would be divided into two. We know that Constantine in 395 AD would divide the Roman Empire into the Eastern Empire, into the Western Empire. Western Empire would stay in Rome. The Eastern Empire, he set up his new capital, Constantinople, in modern-day Turkey, which would later on be changed to the modern-day city of Istanbul. And so what you see here is a dividing of the two empires, East and West. And then notice we see the last one. And there are 10 toes at the bottom of this image of iron and clay brought together. 10 toes, 10 toes, 10 toes, 10 toes. Okay? We're not going to get into all of this, but what we'll see is in Daniel chapter 7, as well as in Revelation chapter 17, that there is coming a day where another empire will rise up out of the old Roman Empire. Out of the old Roman Empire, iron and clay. And what we'll see is in Revelation chapter 17, it tells us that there will be a beast with 10 horns. And the angel will tell John to write these things down. And the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kingdoms. Daniel 2, Daniel 7, and Revelation 17. And for thousands of years, scholars have anticipated some sort of revival of the old Roman Empire. But iron was mixed with clay. It was brittle. It was weakened. And here's what I find interesting is Rome is one of the only empires that was never overthrown. The empire, the nation of Rome was never overthrown. It collapsed from within. It imploded itself. And the feet with the 10 toes of iron and clay reveal some sort of future Roman empire, 10 nations. And Daniel makes it clear that the vision has similar implication, a beast of 10 horns that's coming where a world leader we call the Antichrist will rise up and unify a 10-nation pack or 10-nation regions or something out of the old Roman Empire. Now here's what's crazy, is the Roman Empire outwardly would disappear, but today its laws still exist. Its philosophies still exist. Its institutions of justice and judges and bema seats where judges sit still exist. They would continue to this very day. The only hope that this world has is the return of Christ. And when he comes to this earth, notice what happens. We see 4 of these empires have already been revealed, according to Daniel. 1 is yet to be revealed. A nation of 10 nations, 10 toes, 10 horns, brought together and led by this guy who will deceive people, this guy who will mark people from mark people off, kill people off who believe in Jesus. Now, why is this important? This is important because we might ask the question for us as Christians today living in America, where is America in all of this? Where's America in all of this? And the real answer is we don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us. The Bible doesn't say, there is a nation flag of 50 stars off in the, you know what I mean? Like, the Bible doesn't say anything. It doesn't give us any indicator of America in the Scripture. And sometimes where the Bible is silent, guess what? We need to be silent as well, because we don't know. But there could be a few scenarios why America isn't mentioned in the Bible. Number one, some people would guess the rapture of the church, when Jesus comes to take his people home. We believe in a pre-tribulation rapture as a church. Doesn't mean you can, come here and not believe that. You can believe in mid or post, or we're just optimistic, okay? I do not want to be here when the bad stuff happens, all right? So I'm pre-trib, all right? But, it could be that, and that somehow, some way, I don't know, America's no longer a player on the global scene. Number two, maybe America becomes like Rome. It implodes from within. We don't know. Mark Hitchcock wrote a book called The Late Great United States, and what the Bible reveals about America in the last days. And he says this, it's clear to me that America is not a superpower in the end times. Certainly economic issues could be a part of its demise. Everyone can see how quickly America can be brought to her knees by one little financial crisis. It could be a financial crisis. You guys know, just one little crisis can just plummet everything, housing markets and food and everything like that. And as we see, time is getting worse. Joel Rosenberg gives us maybe a third scenario in some of his books. If you ever have read Joel Rosenberg's books about end times, and they're really great books, he talks about America being under attack and wars and rumors of wars and so on. I mean, who knows? Who knows? But we do know this. Basically, before the return of Jesus, there are 10 either literal or symbolic kingdoms or nations of unequal strength that will rise up out of the old Roman Empire. And since Rome is in Europe, you can probably look to that part of the world today to look at it playing a leading role in the end times. We don't know, there was a time where people were like, it's the European Union, because they had 10 nations as a part of the European Union. Well, now there's like 27. So we don't know. NATO, we don't know. But things are constantly changing in that area. But we definitely see the rise of things taking place in that area, don't we? See the rise of terrorist attacks. How many terrorist attacks have happened in France and Italy and Brussels and all of the things that we see taking place in that part of the world today? Here's what I will say. You can look to our society today and see that it is mixed with iron and clay. Here's what I mean by that. It's weak, it's strong, and it doesn't really work together. Because our society today is mixed with iron and clay, we see treaties being broken. We see promises being ignored, traditions forgotten, money enterprises that are failing, marriage commitments dissolving by divorce. It's all mixed with iron and clay. And the reality is at the end of the day, you and I are nothing but clay. We're made of the dust of this earth, and our hearts are wicked. Our hearts are sinful. You're like, no, not me, Fernando. My heart is good. It's nice. It's filled with nice things. No. At the end of the day, each and every single one of us knows the true depths of our heart. We sin, we gossip, anger, pornography, partying, cussing, dirty jokes. We do all of these things. We build our own kingdoms. We build our own way of doing things. It's my way or the highway. And that's why the dream doesn't end there, because what we see, notice, a rock from a mountain made without hands will come and set up a new kingdom. Notice our last point, predicting the coming. Verse 44, it says, and in the days of these kings, When you see 10 nations rise up together, when you see a man leading these 10 nations or 10 regions or whatever the case might be, when you see these 10 toes, these 10 beasts, in those days the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to the other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all the kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Inasmuch as you saw that stone that was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. This dream is certain, and its interpretation is true. It's sure, it will happen. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, prostrate before Daniel, and commanded that they should present an offering and incense to him. And the king answered Daniel and said, "Truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, the revealer of secrets. And since you could reveal this secret," then the king promoted Daniel, gave him many gifts, and he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, the chief administrator over all the wise men of Babylon. And Daniel petitioned the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel sat in the gate of the king. In those days, when you see these kingdoms rising up and these kingdoms coming together, these kingdoms forming treaties or whatever it might be, it's in those days that God will come and he will set up his kingdom. Who's the stone that we keep talking about here? It's Jesus. Matthew 21:42, Jesus says that he is the stone that the builders have rejected. See, Christ will come and he's going to set up his earthly kingdom and his heavenly kingdom. His will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And this is a future that we as believers are looking forward to. This is a future we should get excited about. That Jesus is coming back. And hopefully Jesus is coming back soon. And I know some of us might be thinking, well, like, I don't want Jesus to come back like now. Like I still got to graduate. I want to get married. Listen, I love you. I love you. But if you getting married or you graduating is hindering the coming of Jesus, I'm laying the smack down on you, bro. Like, man, there's coming a day when Jesus was coming, and we should be excited about that. And what we see here is an image, a picture of the world. Man systems, you see material and its decrease in weight from gold to clay. It's top heavy. And the point that God is trying to make to King Nebuchadnezzar and to Daniel and to you and I today is that the man's way of doing things, man's kingdoms, man's ideas, man's leadership, man's whatever it might be, nations, man's financial systems are not going to last. That God will set up a kingdom that will last forever. And that's why, it's so amazing. Like Daniel would stand in this and God would bless him. He would become, the chief administrator for Babylon, and God would use him. He would sit at the gate of the king, literally having the ear of the king. And what could have been a possible death for these four guys? Remember, Arioch was the chief executioner. He was killing the wise men already. What could have been a possible death? God used for good, and Daniel ends up triumphing in the end. We'll see next week, though, that, there will be some setbacks. The wise men won't like the fact that Nebuchadnezzar blessed Daniel and his friends, and there'll be some fiery furnace craziness going on. But as we close, let's look at three things we can take from this morning's message, and we'll close here quickly. Number one, we need to remember that man is but clay. As we look at this image of the statue and the dream and the mixing of clay and iron, I'm reminded of the fact that these things decrease in value. They decay and decline. And today we live in a world where things are decreasing in value. Morality is decreasing. We see wars, rumors of wars, famine, violence, problems. And many times we like to think, oh, I'm so good. I'm so great. I'm awesome. Look at how good I've got, 500 friends on Facebook. Holla. I've got, 150 subscribers on YouTube, and we think we're so great. I've got, 1,000 Twitter followers. I'm so great. And the reality is we're clay. The reality is we're clay. We're made of this earth. We are created in the image and likeness of God, and each and every single one of us has a heart problem. We have a heart condition. And the only way that heart condition is to be fixed is by the blood of Jesus Christ. So you need to remember who you are, that our only hope is in Jesus. And when you give your heart and your life to Jesus, that is when he can start to change you. Notice our second point, you need to show your mettle. Show your mettle. I think of the metals in this statue, and all of them decrease in value, but they strengthen when they go down. They decrease in value, but they strengthen when they go down. And the same is true for the believer. When we give our lives to Jesus, we decrease in value. We realize, like Daniel said, I'm not smart. It's not because I have wisdom. I'm not great. I'm not awesome. We decrease in value, but we grow stronger when we go down. We grow in our walk with God when we realize that the best place to be is on our knees. We grow stronger in our walk with God when we realize that after all the craziness of this life and the trials and the tribulation and persecutions and all of those things, that we actually get stronger over time. It's like geology. It's one of my favorite illustrations. If you guys remember geology class, geology is really the idea of pressure plus time. Pressure plus time, and it's one of my favorite illustrations. I've used it a million times before. I'll use it again. Coal in the dirt is just that, coal. It's just dirt. But when you apply pressure and time to it, that coal turns into a diamond. This is my wife's engagement ring. Thanks for letting me use it, honey. It becomes a diamond. They're both made up of the same thing, carbon. The difference is pressure and time. And this is the reason why when we go down, when we give our hearts to Jesus and we realize I am not gold, I'm not silver, I'm not bronze, I am clay. When you go down, you realize you grow stronger in your walk with him, and it takes time. The process of sanctification takes time. You know what happens to a piece of coal when you take it out of the ground early? Nothing. It stays black and bitter. And it can be the same with our hearts. If we take the work of God working in our hearts out early, we'll stay black and bitter and dark and so on. But when we allow him to bring the change and bring the pressure and bring that, man, God is working you to make you a beautiful diamond. So remember that you're clay, but show your mettle. Show who you are by going down and giving your life to the Lord and realizing you're stronger with him. And number 3, and we'll close with this. We see this stone come from heaven. I call it the rolling stones. This is the original rolling stones coming from heaven. And there is going to come a day that stone will crush the world's kingdoms and Jesus will be seated on the throne. This stone is Jesus. Isaiah chapter 28. God says, behold, I lay in Zion a stone for a foundation, a tried stone, a precious cornerstone, and whoever believes in him will not be ashamed. Jesus tells us in Matthew 21, whoever falls on this stone will be broken, but on whomever it falls, it will grind him to powder. Don't let your life be like that of the statue, where you are struck with the stone and your life is ground out and wasted. Allow the stone to break you, to mold you, to shape you. Don't be crushed, but give your heart, your life to Jesus. There's coming a day when we get to be with the Lord. It's going to be awesome. I look forward to that day. There's a few events that still need to take place, this little 10 toes, 10 horns. But as you look at the things going on in the world around us, realize, man, it's only Jesus that's ever going to give us hope. It's never going to be whoever we elect. It's never going to be whoever we put into, office or judges we elect or anything like that. We can never find our hope in those things. Our hope is only ever going to be in Jesus Christ. He's the only one that can save. He's the only one that can lead. He's the only one that can give us eternal life. And so we have things to look forward to. And I can't wait to continue on in this, but we'll close here with that. Let's pray. Dear God,